This is the One Accord Podcast, and we're back again with another episode of our Biblical Theology project. Today, we are planning to finish the Book of Leviticus, handling the last three chapters, chapter 25, 26, and 27. And so I'm looking forward to getting into this. A lot of interesting things still to discuss. And why don't we go ahead and bring in Greg first. Greg, how you doing? Good to see you, as always.
Yeah, good to see you. Yeah, not feeling the best, so when I say something mildly uninformed today, it's because I'm not feeling well.
My recollection is that every time you've tried to use that as a caveat to let yourself off the hook for strange things that you might say, it's never really worked. But I'm sorry you're not feeling well.
Worth a try.
It's worth try and try again. So that's good. So Eric, how about you? How are you doing? So good to see you as well.
Yeah, good to be here. I'm doing well. Excited to talk about these chapters, and just a lot of good has been going on recently. So I'm just thankful to God for all of His blessings, and again, happy to get into His Word today.
Yeah, amen. Well, praise the Lord. Micah, how about you? Everything well with you?
I'm doing well. Actually, I'm on a little bit of usually on Monday, I'm on a little bit of a downswing. I'm feeling pretty good today. I got to perform my first baptism yesterday as a pastor. So praise
the Lord. Well, that's very exciting. Hopefully the first of many. So praise the Lord for that. Well, what a joy and a blessing. And so I'm glad to hear that news. Well, guys, why don't we dive right into the material for some of the longtime watchers of our show. You know, we used to read the chapters. Again, we're not planning on reading these three chapters on the episode, but we, of course, all read it. And if you're watching this and aren't familiar with the content, we really would encourage you to maybe press pause on the video now and read these chapters for yourself. You'll get the most out of our conversation if you're familiar with all of the information, just because we're not going to cover every single verse, but we're going to kind of hit the highlights, at least of what stands out to us. And there's always so much more that could be said. But I wanted to start us off as I'm reading the book of Leviticus, chapter 25. We read about this Jubilee year. That's a term that many people have heard. But what is it, and kind of what is the purpose of it?
Well, I'm anxious to say all there is to say. I'm gonna exercise some self-control, but
by saying all that there is to say,
by holding back.
On
he wants to save just a little bit for you to say, Greg. Yeah,
I want to save some for you guys, so I want it to be fair. The Year of Jubilee is something that I'm sure everyone was looking forward to. Maybe everyone, but the Year of Jubilee was every 50th year, and during this time, some incredible things happened. Indentured servants were freed, and we read before about sometimes people would become the servant of someone else to, for example, pay a debt or something like that. And those servants were freed. Property reverted to the original owners, and we'll talk more about that as we get into the specific details of this chapter and why God had it that way. And also farmers were given rest from their labor. And so this was obviously a year that a lot of people were looking forward to. It was kind of almost like a reset in some ways. And it brought great blessing to the people. So I'll leave it at that for now.
No, I'm not convinced that everyone would be so looking forward to this. I mean, if I was a person who was coming on top of these deals, like I was acquiring the land, I was acquiring servants, all of a sudden the morning of the 50th year, I'm like, oh, well, now I got to start over, right?
Well, that's why I said almost everybody.
It does. It's like almost like a forced redistribution. You know, I mean, for those who were on hard times and who had come under excruciating debts, they were released. But yeah, there are. It seems, at least as I'm reading this, that everybody was aware when it was coming. And so, yes, for those who were doing extremely well, this did seem to provide maybe a check for, we all live in a capitalistic society. There are benefits to that. This is a capitalistic society in many ways that we're reading, but this one has not just a safety net, but also almost like a forced cap. Like you can't really get too far ahead. You can't buy up all the land because in the 50th year, it's going back to everybody. Like you could never acquire everything for yourself. And it is curious. It's interesting to see how that would work. If you were owed a debt, you don't get to collect if it's not paid off in time. It's just gone. So, it's curious to see that, and I can certainly see some strengths. But you're right. If there was, Greg, depending on where you're at in the social structure, some might be like, "Oh man, the Jubilee, bummer." But probably most people were excited about it. Micah, you've been kind of quiet. You got any thoughts on the Jubilee?
Yeah, well, it just strikes me that it fits the purposes of the old covenant so beautifully, because people will try to like copy paste, right? They'll say, well, there was a redistribution in this society, and so God must think it is just to redistribute, wealth that you've purchased, or whatever it might be. That ignores the fact that this is for like a specific covenantal purpose. It fits the purposes of the old covenant. What's the purpose of the old covenant? Well, it's to preserve a people, the offspring of Abraham, in their land until the coming of Abraham's offspring, who would ultimately bless the nations, who would bless the Gentiles by giving them his promised spirit through faith. If that's one of the main purposes of the old covenant, then it makes sense that there are measures in place to preserve particular inheritances in the land and particular peoples within the land. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was going to say that one of the important features of this chapter is that it presupposes that all of the Israelites are going to be allotted a certain portion of land in Canaan, and God is trying to maintain those specific allotments or boundaries, whatever you want to call it. This whole chapter presupposes that. And
I think
obviously,
sorry.
Well, they're not in the land yet, but again, God is anticipating. Notice this too. This just dawned on me the other day. I'm reading this. These chapters just take completely for granted that Israel is going to be in the land and they're going to have the land that God had given them. It's like these chapters speak with the utmost certainty that this is going to happen. It's so certain, in fact, that he lays out all these land laws in advance in anticipation of that.
I think it also presupposes something else, something I see in verse 23, and then something I see in verse 55. Verse 23, the land, moreover, shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine. That's God speaking. Yes, you get your portions, and you can trade them and move them around for a little bit, but at the end of the day, they're mine. And the same with the servants. Verse 55, the sons of Israel are my servants. They are my servants who I brought up out of the land. Thoughts on God's emphasis of the fact that, again, with the land or with the people, you can shuffle them around a little bit. You can trade them like baseball cards a little bit, but at the end of the day, they belong to me.
I think the purpose of the law in verse 23, the primary purpose was to keep land in the hands of the original owners. We know that God, again, this is presupposing that God is going to give each tribe a certain part of the land of Canaan. And certain families are going to be given certain portions of the land. And it seems to me like God wanted to keep the land in the hands of the original recipients. And, of course, God, maybe this is going ahead, but, we're already, these chapters are already looking forward to this happening. But God eventually allotted certain portions of Canaan to each tribe, and he wanted to maintain these land boundaries. And when God said that the land is mine, I think there's a broad way to look at this, and there's a more specific way to look at it. I think the specific way is that he meant that he had the authority to divide the land among the tribes as he saw fit. And so he's saying, like, I'm giving you, I'm portioning out the land, or I will, when the time comes, in a certain way. I'm doing this, this is my choice because this is my land. And if I say that one person is to have this portion, another person is to have the other portion, and then on Jubilee, all the people are going to be going back to their, to the lands that I gave them originally. That's my choice. The land is mine. I can do with it as I please. And so I think that's the more, I'll say, specific intention of this law. Again, we could the broad intention, of course, the broad meaning is that God, of course, owns everything not only in the world, but the whole universe, because he's the creator of all things. So
Yeah.
I more so am focusing on, I guess, the specific meaning here.
Yeah, I definitely take it more in that broader way that you were saying at the end. And I don't know, as you were talking, I guess I don't, it's not like I was disagreeing, but I was like, it's not really what I was thinking about. I was thinking more of that broader extent. And then if you think this way, then you realize, well, we're just stewards of these things. And so kind of the assumption you were saying just a few minutes earlier, God was assuming, of course, you're going to go into the land. Well, because he's God and he can make these things happen, and he's going to take it away from the Canaanites and he's going to give it to them, and then it will be theirs. But they aren't to ever forget that nothing that they have, they didn't do it by their own strength. They didn't do it because of their own, ingenuity or whatever. God is giving it to them, and so they ought to steward it appropriately. And I think that is something that is often lost in, I don't know, modern property rights, right? People think, this is mine. I can do with it as I please. It's my property. And to some extent, sure. But if you always are keeping in mind that we're stewards of what God has entrusted to us, then we ought to use them according to the intention that he said, and we're not going to use it to grind the face of the poor or to abuse people made in the image of God, or to enrich ourselves to the, complete impoverishment of our fellow countrymen or anything else like that. So that's kind of, I guess, how I take it in that more broad sense as you laid it out.
Yeah, as I read this, I definitely would agree with. Again, through my lens, I see that more broad being the point of what he's saying. Not that what you're saying, Eric, isn't in the specific sense isn't true. I think it is, but I feel like the thrust of the point he's making, the land, moreover, shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine, for you are aliens and sojourners with me. I think the focus is more on God's ownership than it is about how he plans to particularly divide it up in the future.
Yeah, well, I think when he says you're not to sell it permanently, I think the implication of that is that it belongs to a certain family. And in the
the implication is it belongs to God.
Well, true, but I think the idea is, yes, but God ultimately is the reason why the land is divided in this way. I think is the way that I took it. I mean, of course, it's true that the whole land belongs to God. I mean, everything belongs to God. I just think because the context, and Joe, you are right when he talks about, like, don't grind the face of the poor, like you said. That is definitely in view here. I think just as I reason through it, because the context is dealing with, I think, keeping the land within, these families that God gave it to. I don't know. To me, that seems more natural from the context to me. But again, that's just the way I look at it.
Do you guys think that, for specifically for Joe and Greg, do you think that there's any distinction being drawn between, generally speaking, like God is the creator and owner of all things, and then how he is calling this land his? Because I can see what you're saying, and that's definitely true of all the things that God has given us to steward in general. But I see this as like this land as being, he's drawing attention to the fact that this is his special possession that he's giving as an inheritance to his people. And because of that, they have certain responsibilities about how they are to treat one another in it. I would even see this pattern going back to Adam and the dominion mandate. He's being told to take dominion of all things as the image of God. And as they fill the earth, they're supposed to image and reign as vice regents of the true king. I see that something similar happening in this land of inheritance with the children of Israel.
I agree with that 100%. Yeah, I certainly wasn't implying otherwise or intending to. The scriptures, I think, are very clear in making both points. God is the owner of everything. He is the God of heaven and earth. He's not just a mere cultic deity, or a regional deity that is only, to be worshipped by Israel and everybody else. All these other false gods are genuine or something like that. Like that's always been clear. But that particular special emphasis when he says, well, I've made you to be my people, apart from these other people. And this land is the land that I've chosen for my name to dwell there. God has a greater purpose in these very particular choices that he's doing to show his glory to all the earth, as the world is in rebellion against him after the fall. So I don't think I had any disagreement with what you said. So I'll let Greg speak for himself. But no, I agree with I think what you said 100%.
I agree with that. I don't know that that's the point trying to be made here.
Yeah, I mean the idea that others aren't going to steward things properly, because they're chosen, he wants them to really understand this principle particularly and demonstrate it to the world. And as a result of that, I think all of my other things, the main point that Greg, you were saying that I was saying, that seems to be the main thrust, because he's chosen them to be his particular people. Now he expects them to live differently. And Eric's brought it up several times, especially in some of our systematic videos. God still seems like he'll hold these other nations account as if they should have done things this way. But Israel has this wonderful blessing of being much more explicit. So
whatever Joe said, I agree with that. So.
I actually have a question for you guys about this. What do you guys think that the significance of it being specifically on the 50th year is? Do you think that there's anything especially or theologically significant about that? Or do you think, that's just when God wanted it to be and we don't really know much otherwise?
I don't have a strong opinion or even an opinion about that. I do know that, we all know that whenever God chooses a certain day and it falls on a particular number, like 50 in this case, there's a reason for it. I don't think this was an arbitrary. I don't think God ever chooses anything arbitrarily. Like, okay, I'm just going to pick this day because, I don't know, 50 just seems like a good number. I think there must have been a reason. I really haven't looked very far into that, or far at all. So I guess I'll let Joe and Greg do the enlightening.
Yeah, I don't know that I have anything super enlightening. I guess all I would say is I do recognize in the Bible where at times we see numbers and patterns of numbers having significance. Why God has chosen the 7 for the weeks and 12 for other things, or 3 for other things. I think there's value in recognizing that pattern. I don't know that I have a diagnostic root cause. Here's why God chose that.
Yeah, I certainly don't have anything profound. I do know that if I lived in this culture, just the way that I think most people would prefer, if you're going to count the years, dealing with blocks of 50 rather than blocks of 49 sure is convenient, because you're going to lose track of the 49s pretty easily. But having your these chunks of significant time in the 50-year periods, so 7 sevens, then with a 50th year. Is certainly convenient. God could have made our minds work a different way, that we had like a base 7, mindset or something like that. But again, that's not an answer to your question, really. It's just
50 seems I don't want to use the word reasonable, as if some other number God have chosen would have been unreasonable. But this is like a once in a lifetime event. It's not like this has happened in every other year or something. And so, I guess I just would want to point out that you probably aren't seeing more than one of these in your lifetime.
Definitely not 3 of them.
Definitely not 3. No. Or 4. Or 5.
So what I find it to be significant that it comes after a work rest cycle. Like it's immediately following the normal work rest cycle of like seven Sabbaths of years, or 7 weeks of years.
Have you heard that 7 is the perfect number?
Well, I do think it probably is used that way. But as it stands, though, like there are things within the law of the Old Covenant that, like, there are various things that happen after the normal work rest cycle. Like, for instance, circumcision is administered when? It's on the 8th day. It's after the Sabbath. It's on the first day of the following week. There are other things. There are other things as well. Cleansing from leprosy, Leviticus 14:10, that happens on the 8th day. So cleansing from ritual uncleanness. Let's see, there was one more. Oh yeah, Leviticus 9:1. On the 8th day of Aaron's consecration, Moses called him and the elders, and the glory of the Lord appeared to the people. So there appears to be some significance to that time period that is immediately following the normal work rest cycle that ends with the Sabbath on the seventh day. And it appears to be intensified in this Jubilee year when it's after 7 sevens of years, when there's this total release that is inaugurated with the blast of a trumpet, and all the captives are set free, and the inheritance goes back to those to whom it belongs. So it's like inheritance, release from slavery, things like that. And I can't help but notice that I'm going to go ahead and take this demerit on the chin. Jesus rose from the dead on the 8th day. And after that normal work rest cycle. And I do think that these things are probably pointing forward, or not probably, they are pointing forward to him in some way. And I think that those things that I've mentioned might be something along the lines of that. Like, there's a reason circumcision happens on the 8th day. There's a reason that the 50th year after these 7 Sabbaths of years is the Jubilee, the year of release. It's pointing forward in some way, I think, to the redemption that's in Christ.
I think I completely agree with that. I just don't know what it is, and so I don't want to be diagnostic about it and try to, some numerology to, read the tea leaves properly. Again, I want to recognize it and appreciate it and glorify God for it. But I've just seen, in my opinion, where people take that way too far and go, oh, because of that, it means this, and therefore you have to agree with me. Otherwise, we have to start a new denomination, and we can't be friends because of it. So,
yeah. The nature of things in the Old Testament being a shadow of the substance that is to come, of course, is always attempting to get us to run ahead and to earn ourselves demerits. Certainly, when we get to talking about Jesus's life and ministry, there are some interesting parallels. And so I'm not going to try and get myself a demerit, but since you already opened the door, I do have a fault. Like, if you talk about the resurrection being on the 8th day, certainly that typical, you were citing some other passages that we've seen already from Leviticus, for example, things being on the 8th day. I guess maybe I missed it. This is a much bigger scale. So you think this is the same thing, just kind of blown up a little bit, or was there some additional significance? Because 8th day and 50th year, I guess I was missing how those dots connected. And perhaps I'm just slow this morning.
I would say that they're connected because it's after the normal work. It's at the end of a period of the normal work rest cycle. So work rest, 6 days of labor, 7th day rest. That's writ large or blown up in this Jubilee year, which is the 50th year, comes after the 49th year. By the way, there would have been 2 years here, it seems, where there's no labor taking place. At the end of that that Sabbath year, at the end of that 7th set of 7. 49th year, no one's working. 50th year, Jubilee year, no one's working. So it's 2 years at the end. I see it as pretty much what you said. It's the same reality blown up, same reality writ large. It's at the end of the normal work rest cycle. But the fact that it comes after it, I think, is pointing to a day when the work is done.
Fair enough. I appreciate that. Greg, you kind of started this conversation with hitting verse 23 and verse 55 in the statements that God is making about his ownership of these things. In between, there's this, seemingly this discussion about the ability to redeem. The way I read this, maybe I'm misunderstanding it. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. But, you didn't have to wait to the Jubilee necessarily. You could potentially redeem these things earlier. And so am I reading that right? Or would you guys explain kind of these laws of redemption differently? But it seems like, you weren't just necessarily waiting until the Jubilee. There was a possibility to redeem things beforehand.
I think so. Let me just give a broader explanation for the law of redemption. The law of redemption was a system for restoring land to the original owners and servants to freedom. And it was intended to, I think, again, to maintain the integrity of family inheritances and prevent permanent servitude among the Israelites, because as we read earlier in Exodus, I think it was 21, if I remember right, they were only to be, they were not to be permanent servants or permanent slaves. It was just for a limited period of time. So this law of redemption was a a gracious provision that gave people hope. And I think I agree that a servant, for example, who, let's say he he had to pay a certain amount in order to be free. Well, I don't think he had to wait. I understand it to mean that he could, if he had the funds to pay that amount right then and there, he could do that, and he could be freed right at that time. So it wasn't like he had to wait. He wasn't limited by time. He was limited by resources, is how I understand it. So I don't know if anyone has a different opinion.
Yeah, you could redeem sooner. Certainly. I mean, this is me, whether I'm remembering this correctly or not, but I don't think that the Sabbath year or the Jubilee has anything to do with the situation in the Book of Ruth or anything like that. It certainly seems that you could redeem sooner if you had the resources to do so and you had a kinsman who was willing. But I just realized I did it again.
Yeah, Greg, I noticed on Greg's face, Greg hit him first, and then I don't know if, as he was smirking, it was you were like, oh no,
the Book of what?
I've done it again. Yeah. Greg, what? Aside from ensuring that we know that Micah took a second demerit already, you have other thoughts on
this on me? No, I have no thoughts. It definitely seems like there was a way for these things to be purchased out earlier, because again, 50 years, whether we like to think of it or not, as some of us are getting closer to that, isn't all. It's a long time. It would be a long time if something happened in year 3, to wait for the rest, if you had the resources to purchase it out. And again, I think that's, again, going back to that emphasis on it didn't really belong to you. It doesn't really belong to me. It belongs to God. And so my ability to reclaim that which he has given me, I think is pretty important. So as we think about that, and as we've looked at this whole chapter, one thing that stood out to me, and wonder what you guys are thinking about this, so far, as we've got up through Leviticus, now 25, it seems like God was making a lot of provisions along the way for those who would come in and sojourn and live like natives among the people. It seems like he was leaving a lot of doors open for that. Yet here, starting at verse 45, kind of through the end of this chapter, there remains this distinction or some distinction based upon who could or couldn't become a slave. Israelites could become slaves in the sense that they were like hired laborers, but they couldn't become permanent property. They couldn't be passed down or inherited. Why do you guys think that somebody who it seems like otherwise God is including, I don't use the word completely, but integrating into Israelite society, why this distinction, do you think, that sojourners and the children of sojourners could be treated as slaves and purchased and handed down, when it seems like it could be just as easily like full integration, and they would have the same rights living as sojourners?
Okay, I want to make sure I understand your question. So there's an obvious distinction here, and not only here but elsewhere, between.
But there's obvious integration too. So why this separation?
Yeah. So an Israelite could be what amounted to an indentured servant for a limited period of time. In Leviticus 25, it makes it sound as if a non-Israelite could be bought from the, politically incorrect language, but from the slave market, or if they conquered another enemy nation. Again, I'm not talking about Canaanites, because remember, they were to annihilate the Canaanites, but there were other nations that were even further out. They could, if they conquered that nation, they could take as slaves the captives from those nations. So anyway, it seems like if they purchased slaves from these nations roundabout, those were permanent slaves, like you said, Greg. They could be handed down even to descendants. They were basically treated like property. So there was obviously a distinction between an Israelite slave or servant and a foreign slave.
But what I guess the distinction, or maybe there's a third category that I think I see, and maybe I get we conquered these people or we purchased them from a slave market. But as I read verse 45, then too, it is out of the sons of the sojourners who live as aliens among you. And maybe that those who live as aliens, but those who live as natives, maybe there's a distinction there that I'm maybe not seeing. But a sojourner who's living among Israelites isn't the same thing as Israelites going out and taking captives or purchasing people. At least I don't think there is.
Right. Well, as long as they were a non-Israelite, it sounds as if there was the possibility of becoming a permanent slave for an Israelite. So your question is like, what? Like why? Why?
I'm sorry,
why?
This is a bad question.
No, I'm having a hard time tracking.
As I see integration into Israelite society for those who choose to sojourn among the Israelites, it seems to me like that integration is very complete in some ways, but yet not complete in others. And so, as I read the text, this jumped out as interesting. One of those points where apparently there still seems to be some distinction and separation where otherwise there was integration. And so, yes, why?
There's still barriers between even those who would join themselves to the people of Israel and be circumcised and join the nation and participate in some measure in the blessings that are there for the people. They're still called sojourners with them, though. And that's important because that's different than people who dwell in this land as part of their inheritance. There's still a hard barrier that it hasn't been taken down yet between this particular people of God's possession who are ethnically from the line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There's still a barrier here that hasn't been removed. So an Israelite can't become permanently a slave because of all the principles that we've already seen about redemption and release and inheritance. Perpetual slavery would totally cut against the grain of all those principles for the Israelite, whose inheritance is a portion of this land. A slave doesn't really have that. However, if you're a sojourner, then you have no such like permanent inheritance in this land, not while this barrier still exists.
I think that I agree with you 99%. I just don't think that it's the yet part. I think that this distinction always remains, and it is that's setting us up for future conversation. Yeah, but at this point, yes, certainly it hasn't been taken down yet, and that's the heart of Greg's question. I think is that this, we see here that there is. In many ways, integration that's allowed, but there is still a distinction that must be maintained. The promise to Abraham is going to come from his literal descendants, and so maintaining these genealogies, maintaining this distinctness, and any purpose that God has in bringing forth the promise that He has made of this seed that is going to come to be a blessing of all the nations is still being done through this very particular group of people. And so while others might be able to enjoy blessings by participating in some of those things in some way and in very meaningful ways, at the same time, this distinction must be maintained. And I see it here, I see it in many other places, and I anticipate we'll continue to see it. And I'll be interested to see where you think it's ever taken down, if the Bible ever tells us that. And we can talk about that as it comes. So
I might just say there is no distinction. I don't know. Could say that.
Possibly. We'll have to see when we get there.
We are dancing.
Eric, were you about to say something?
Here.
We are dancing on it sure.
I'm the only Eric.
You're the one who basically quoted a passage, Greg. I mean, come on.
I said you could say that. I didn't say it did. Nice try. Listen, you dirty dog. You will give me one.
I didn't give you one. I just said you weren't dancing on the edge.
I wasn't.
And you're the one who's basically paraphrasing things that we all know is to come in the future. So just, be honest about your dancing, and then we can move on. Eric, were you about to say something?
Yeah, well, some it seems to me like some exclusion of foreigners just made good sense for certain laws. For example, if you look at we were just talking about the festivals. If you look at the Feast of Booths, just as an example, it says in Leviticus 23, verse 42, "You shall live in booths for 7 days. All the native born in Israel shall live in booths, so that your generations may know that I had the sons of Israel live in booths when I brought them out from the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God." It would make no sense for just some random, foreigner to come and to, participate in this event in a way that was as if they also had come out of Egypt, or their ancestors had come out of Egypt, if they just didn't. So, I mean, it's like some of this stuff is, I guess, very Israel specific, just simply because some of these things only applied to Israel. Some of these things only happened to their nation. And so,
I guess I agree with all that. And I'm thinking probably most specifically right now, thinking of Leviticus 19:34, "The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as the native among you, and you shall love him as you love yourself." And the reality that there were Egyptians, presumably, hearing this right as God is saying these things. And so, again, it just seems to me there are times where integration looks so complete, and there are times where we still see these distinctions, and I find it interesting.
I think that is a very important thing to keep in mind as we perhaps wrestle with the coming substance, that in some ways, this distinction, especially in everyday life, everything you just said, there are some that maybe did come out. They aren't Israelites, but they did come out maybe in that mixed multitude. And in many ways, in many areas of life, there isn't a distinction. They're not to be treated differently. They're part of the group. At the same time, there is a distinction that is very important, that including everything Eric said and perhaps even more, there was a very particular promise made to this very particular people who God did bring into Egypt and brought out of Egypt, and now is going to bring forth the Messiah from, and perhaps other promises as well that would encourage a maintaining of the identity of the lineage of Abraham, specifically through Isaac and through Jacob.
And I did see your smirk. Just for the record, I saw the smirk. And
all right,
it is.
I'm still reeling. I'm pretty sure you called me a dirty dog. I'm gonna have to run the tape back.
Sure, I did.
I haven't been called a dirty dog in a while. So anyway, I got nothing else to add on that. But I do think that this is a good question, and I appreciate you asking. I have no further thoughts on it.
And I apologize, Greg, for not understanding you right away. I understand it clearly now, and so as we talked about it, it made more sense.
Yeah.
So forgive me for my
foolishness. It's all on me. So.
Okay, well, let's jump into chapter 26 of Leviticus. And as I was reading this, one thing that just jumped out at me, and this is not dealing with a specific verse, but it's dealing with the chapter as a whole. I noticed that the penalties of disobedience are 3 times longer than the blessings of obedience section. So my question is, why did God feel the need to give them so many more threats and warnings than encouragements and blessings and things like that? What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Have you met you? I think the answer might be staring you in the face.
I'm playing a little dumb here, but I'm well. Yes, so that I guess that's your answer. That speaks volumes.
Well, yeah. My initial thought when I was reading through this was similar to I think what Greg's sentiment is that people because of just our sinful nature and our sinful hearts, we maybe just need to have some elaboration on if we don't. But after thinking about it a little bit more, and just kind of thinking about really what God is saying, it's not that it's just a warning, but I don't know, it seems to me that if they obey, they get all of these amazing things, and he's upfront about that. This is what it's going to be. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to give you these things. It'll be great for you. But then the disobedience section is kind of a layered thing. Like it's not like you disobey once and then it's all right. Punishment. It's if you disobey me, I'm going to do this, And then if you keep disobeying me, I'm going to do this other thing. And then if you keep disobeying me, and it's kind of like ramping it up and getting to really try and get their attention, it seems to me. And so that then would necessarily, because it's layered and there's some caveats to it, and it's not an all or nothing kind of proposition, that to me seems to explain the additional length, because I don't think that God is intending, like, I think that if they're obeying the law, he intends to give them these blessings. They get all of it. If they begin to deviate, he doesn't just turn off all blessing and open up the tap completely of curses, and they just get all of them at once. That's not how it goes. So that's kind of why it seems like it lingers a little bit longer, because it's got a longer runway, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with that. As I read this, it's kind of similar to Joe. And if you still won't, and if you still won't, and if you still won't, I think it's an effective teaching tool for people who need to be taught.
You can see that even in the language that is used in, you can see verse 21, you could see verse 23. Then if you walk contrary to me and will not listen to me, I will continue striking you sevenfold for your sins. Or then verse 23, and if by this discipline you are not turned to me, but walk contrary to me, then I will also walk contrary to you, and I myself will strike you sevenfold for your sins. So there's an overemphasis on the continuing nature of this. Like, I'm going to discipline you, and if you keep doing it, it's going to get progressively worse and worse and worse. It's just like, obviously on a much less severe scale, but disciplining your children. There is a scale of severity to discipline, and at least that's how it works in my house. Some things might get you removed from the situation. Some things might get you a timeout, and then it gets worse from there.
Some things will get you beaten within an inch of your life.
I'm going to leave that where it is. But yeah, so there's a increasing severity to the punishment here, and it becomes more severe with continued recalcitrant disobedience.
A real what?
Great word usage. Yes.
Eric said, "Talk to me like I'm 5."
Yeah, I see. I think this makes sense to me, and especially given the fact that Israel has already, even this early on, been so disobedient to God. It wasn't as if, it wasn't like, God was making all these threats, and Israel had just obeyed him perfectly up until this point. Israel was very disobedient, even to the point of worshiping an idol right after he told them not to. And God had to judge the nation pretty harshly for that, and they brought it on themselves. And so I think, God knew these people. He knew their hearts. He knew what they were inclined to do. And so he's saying, out of love for you, I'm gonna tell you, like, if you disobey me, and I like what Joe said. God didn't just. It's not like God, the moment someone disobeys, God just unleashes hell on the person. God's judgments are progressive. They get progressively worse. I think that's true for any follower of God, not just the Israelites. There's a initial punishment. It's like, it's meant to correct the person, get them back on track. If they refuse to obey, even after that, the penalty is increased, and then it gets, worse and worse. And in this chapter, the worst penalty that's given is exile from the land, expulsion from the land. And we already read about that, like in Leviticus 18, where God said, if you disobey, the land will spew you out. You're going to be thrown out of the land. So anyway, I agree with what you guys had said.
I feel we talked about this at least in concept several times, but before I was a follower of the Lord, I definitely viewed a lot of the Old Testament stuff, especially God as being so harsh. You see something like this and go, look at this, it's 3 times as long. It's so harsh. It's so harsh. It's so harsh. But I think all of us at least share the similar perspective that really God is incredibly gracious towards everything that he's made. And, we think it's harsh because, I don't know, we think we're better than we are, or we don't really realize that we deserve, something terrible. And parents, might see this with their kids. Kids, they don't, well, why, Micah, you're talking about in your household how your, kids might have various punishments. Sometimes they might look at you and go, Dad, that's not fair. My sister took a toy from me, I hit her, and so why would I get a timeout? That's unjust. You're being rude. She took something from me, and I took matters into my own hands because you were doing nothing about it. And like, so now it's your fault. And so, as creation is rebelling against God, God could do what we already saw him do in the days of Noah. He could just flood and kill everybody. Like, that's what we could get. And instead, there is this ramping up, and there's this effort that's made to reconcile these relationships. And so, I really do see, even in these punishments, God's telling them in advance He doesn't want them to have any of these things. And I imagine that that's how it is for most parents. If you are warning your children, listen, don't do these things. I don't want to give you timeouts. I don't want to do these. I don't want to take, your privileges away. That's not the intention. The intention is He wants to bless them. That's why He front loads it with that. This is what I want to do. I want you to obey me. I want you to listen to what I'm telling you. It'll go well for you. It'll go well for everybody else. Everything will be better if you just listen. And they don't. And so I see God's kindness and grace all throughout this personally. It is strange. And I imagine that, there might be some people watching this, or certainly people who are skeptical towards the Bible, or who hate the God of the Old Testament, or, quote unquote, even the group of Christians that want to separate more and more from the Old Testament, they still view this as harsh. But I really don't see it that way. And when they didn't take God at His word, He did exactly what He said He was going to do. But man, what a great thing that He warned them in advance. If you won't get yourself together, He's got this. He's gonna fix it. And so God seems like He's always telling, like, I could end you so fast. Just listen to me. But people are continuing in their, I'm going to use Micah's word, recalcitrant behavior. You got to use it, otherwise you lose it. Anyway.
Yeah, well, and that brings me to the second question. We've already touched on this, but I just want to emphasize just a few points, and I'll let you guys chime in. But we've already basically said that in these warning passages in Leviticus 26, we see that there is so much grace being revealed, so much grace being demonstrated, and so I guess we could maybe talk a little bit more about that. We've already touched on it a little bit. I guess I'll just start this time and say that, as we've already said, that the punishments get progressively worse over time. God doesn't start at the worst punishment right off the bat. And by the way, if a person hearing this didn't want to be punished by God, I'm going to say something very profound. Then just don't do it. Don't disobey. You don't have to worship an idol. You don't have to commit bestiality. You don't have to do evil.
You could not do that. Yeah.
You could just stop doing that, or not do it at all. And then you would escape these judgments. God gets all this flack from punishing people. It's like, well then stop. Yeah. Don't oppress the poor. Don't cheat people. Don't lie and steal. Don't act like that. Like, it's almost like people take the side of the villain. And these days, oh my goodness, like, the villain is put on a pedestal now. In some groups in America, it's like the villain gets all the grace, and the innocent person, well, forget them. But I look at this and I go, well, if you don't want to be sent into exile, then just do what God's told you to do. And they already agreed to do that in the first place. God's not asking anything crazy, or unreasonable. And apparently they didn't think so either, because they already agreed to do it. So, by the way, one last thing, these things, these penalties, punishments, do seem really severe. But notice that even the last one is exile. God says, I'm going to punch you out of the land, and you're going to be sent into a foreign land. But then He says, I'll just read I'm not going to paraphrase. Notice He says in 26, verse 40, if they confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their forefathers, in their unfaithfulness which they committed against me, and also in their acting with hostility against me, I also was acting with hostility against them to bring them into the land of their enemies, or if their uncircumcised heart becomes humbled so that they then make amends for their iniquity, then I will remember my covenant with Jacob, and I will remember also my covenant with Isaac and my covenant with Abraham as well, and I will remember the land. For the land will be abandoned by them and will make up for its Sabbaths while it is made desolate without them. They, meanwhile, will be making amends for their iniquity because they rejected my ordinances and their soul abhorred my statutes. Yet, in spite of this, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not reject them, nor will I so abhor them as to destroy them, breaking my covenant with them, for I am the Lord their God. I mean, my goodness, how much grace, does God give? I mean, he tells them, I'll throw you out of the land. I will send you into the land of your enemies. And if even while you're in exile, if you'll cry out to me, if you'll confess your sins, if you'll repent, I will forgive your iniquity and even, remember the land. I'll bring you back into the land. So, I mean, like he's giving him chance after chance after chance. If there's one thing we should take away from this, it's that God gives not second chances, but he gives like chances to the nth degree. So I see God's grace in this. Again, God, there's limits to God's grace. I want to be clear about that. But God gives an awful lot of it before he completely pulls the plug.
And there's grace. So there's grace offered within, even at the most severe points within this sort of escalating staircase of punishments. But I would just notice that there's something gracious in the commands themselves. God doesn't give these commands because he wants to deprive them of good. He doesn't. That's the lie of the serpent. Has God really said that you may not eat of any tree in the garden? No, he didn't say that. He said, don't eat this one. So that's always the temptation with commands, though. It's to say, God wants to deprive me of pleasure. God wants to deprive me of joy. God is actually mean and has a harsh spirit in his commands. No, actually, they are guardrails for your blessing. They're guardrails for your blessing. God actually intends to multiply blessings to you through what he has told you to do. So there's grace and there's mercy on undeserving people. They're undeserving before they even start doing any of this stuff. There's grace and there's mercy on undeserving people, even in the instructions that he gives them.
Absolutely. I think it was John Wesley who said that every command of God is also a promise of God. So, like, if God says, don't, don't lie, what he's saying is, I will help you not to lie. Or if God says, don't steal, what he's saying is, I will help you not to steal. So it's like, yeah, I totally agree with what you said. I think that it's all these warnings are actually God's blessings for the nation.
Let's move into the last chapter. The valuations that are there can sometimes be controversial. Some people, I guess, at least that I've talked to, really don't like these things. But again, I like, everything that you guys have been saying. I, like you, I read this as gracious and kind. And so I kind of read these valuations as offering a substitutionary medium, in certain ways, which is, I think, an act of grace. Although sometimes, again, people want to ask, well, why is this valued this way and something else valued a different way? I'm just looking at the system in general, that it is, it's providing a substitutionary way to redeem certain things, and by paying an alternate price. Do you guys read it differently than that? Or again, do you have any other thoughts on these valuations?
Yeah, I'll just give a broad explanation. I think the purpose of valuations was to determine the price for redeeming a person, animal, or even property dedicated to God through a vow. That seems to be what the chapter's talking about. Valuations for persons were based on gender, age, and economic status, which makes perfect sense because naturally, a man is going to be able to do more physical labor than a woman is. Age makes a difference. A younger person is going to be able to do more than a very old person. So there's to me, I'm not confused, I guess, by the amounts that are stated. Valuations for animals were determined by priests who decided whether the animal was good or bad. The same rule applied to houses. And concerning fields, fields are mentioned here. The valuation was in proportion to the seed needed for it. And Nothing set apart could be sold or redeemed. So that's just a broad explanation.
Yeah, I think people read this with feminist blinders on, because that's what we're talking about. People saying, how could a man be worth more? Well, they're talking about economic value. They're not talking about intrinsic worth. Those are two different discussions. We're talking about economic value here. Especially in this day, the economic value of a working aged male is higher than even a working aged female. That's so. Even the fact that objection comes up just shows either you just grossly misunderstand the context, or you've got some sort of pre-commitments that you're devoting yourself to.
Yeah, and like everything else with that spirit that kind of drives feminism, the burden on a male was higher than that. To redeem a male, it costs you more. You'd think that depending on which lens you want to look through, that's unfair. And so
it's a good point.
Instead of trying to get ourselves wrapped up around these things, I would rather just look at this and go, praise God that there was a way to be redeemed, rather than the way that the pagan nations surrounding them decided to do it.
I think that's well said. Eric, you mentioned at the beginning of your, just kind of your thoughts that this is about things that are devoted to the Lord. How does verse 28 interact with what you said? Certainly things that are devoted to the Lord. I don't know. Verse 28 kind of says something that almost sounds maybe potentially contradictory to that. I just want to read it. It says, nevertheless, anything which a man sets apart to the Lord out of all that he has, of man or animal or the fields of his own property, shall not be sold or redeemed. Anything devoted to destruction is most holy to the Lord. What is this a caveat for? Like, because again, if there was things that were set apart to the Lord that could be redeemed, now this is saying that certain things can't be. They're most holy. So what's the difference between these things?
So this is a really interesting verse, and I had a hard time really getting to the meaning of this. The Hebrew word translated devoted is, I think it's cherem. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, probably not. But it actually means banned. Some translations use the word banned. If something was banned, it was prohibited from common use, and in some sense, set apart to the Lord. It could not be taken for oneself. It couldn't be sold or redeemed. And if someone did take something banned, they brought a curse upon themselves. If it was banned to destruction, it had to be destroyed, and that means the destruction was unavoidable. Now, it's we're talking about people here, right? Like, or at least people are mentioned in this chapter. People are not the only thing in view. But it seems to me like if a person, like, a person couldn't just devote another person to destruction just whenever they wanted to. As a matter of fact, I'm not even sure a normal person could even do that. It would have to be probably like someone in authority, like someone acting as a judge or something like that. It's kind of confusing. And again, there are chapters ahead of us that kind of explain this better. I'm not gonna go there. But I will say that it's kind of, the language is a little bit confusing because it makes it sound like, destruction is like, well, it has to be destroyed. And in some cases that was true. It almost seems like banned may be, I don't know, maybe a better word to use, because banned seems like it fits better with destruction. Because again, some things that were dedicated to the Lord were not destroyed. But there were other things that were dedicated to the Lord that were. So this was kind of confusing to me. I gave you just a general definition of this.
Yeah, there definitely seems to be a difference as we work through this chapter between that which is consecrated and that which is, as Eric said, could be translated as banned.
Or permanently dedicated. It's the same verse. It's the same word as verse 21 about a field that is permanently dedicated, that doesn't revert back in the Jubilee. It actually becomes property of the priest. So it's a different caveat to some of the other inheritance laws for the land that we had talked about earlier, that some lands, if they were permanently dedicated, would become the possession of the priests in the Jubilee from that point forward. So that is interesting. So yeah, band or permanent dedication. These are all, I don't know. The context, of course, is important. Micah, you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah. So the way that I've always heard this described, and what makes sense to me, is when you devote something to the ban, or when you, as my English text has it, devote something to destruction. You could also say this is like the peoples that the Israelites were going in to drive out. These peoples were devoted to destruction. In a certain sense, this is being viewed as a ceremonial offering to the Lord. That's why it's used in similar terminology to when you like set something apart as holy. Well, you're doing something different with it. There's a difference between consecrating something and consecrating it, setting it apart for this purpose. I see the purpose here as decidedly negative for the recipient. When you devote something to the band, that is a kind of ceremonial offering to the Lord, but it's an offering that it's a type of devotion that you can't offer a substitute for. No, this person has to die. I think that's what it's saying.
Yeah, I mean, verse 29 definitely has the death aspect that's included. So,
and this may become an interesting point of discussion later in the text, later in the Bible.
Very possibly.
It's kind of confusing because clearly the verse is talking about destruction. I mean, it says destruction, but then you look at how this is applied elsewhere, and again, that's why I didn't want to get further ahead. But it almost sounds like something that's under the ban is not always destroyed, because that same word is used. You're right, Micah, when you said that no doubt that the nations that were set apart for destruction fall into this category. I think that's definitely a correct way to understand it. It just seemed to me like there were some cases in which that word is applied to things that might not be destroyed. So that was what was confusing to me. Maybe I'll look into this a little bit further.
I mean, it definitely is interesting. Earlier in the chapter, as Joe pointed out, there is a way in which a field is set apart. But then verse 29, no one who may have been set apart among men shall be ransomed. He shall surely be put to death. So within this category, there are different ways of dispensing of that which has been set apart for the ban.
Yeah, I don't see them destroying the field, in the earlier part and giving the priest some worthless piece of
salting the land and look here you go. Here's your dead field.
I mean, if that's what's in view, it just sure doesn't seem that way to me. So it's an interesting it is just an interesting thought. And again, how you would set someone apart for this, or certainly we can keep our eye on this as we go further on. There are, as we know, maybe some other places where why this would becomes clearer. And so, as God is laying out these laws and as he's explaining this to them, for people to think that maybe they're, if God, I don't know if this is them setting apart, or if God says, hey, these things are set apart, you're not to redeem these, these aren't for your use. I remember back when I was in college, I had just come to the Lord, and I was a part of a group that was discussing the Bible. And this one fellow student had said something, as I read the Bible, it just seems so human. I would expect that God would act better, but I see all these wars, and I see people destroying each other and taking their women and taking their cow. It just seems so human. And I remember asking him, well, there are actually some places where God says you're going to go and you're going to destroy these people, but you're going to destroy all their cattle. And again, I'll get a demerit for this because we haven't seen that yet. But you're going to destroy all their cattle, and you're not going to take these people for yourself, and you're not going to take their gold or their silver. That doesn't seem human at all. Like, what other group would go in and then take everything that's valuable and get rid of it? Like, they didn't do it for their gain. They did it for a different purpose, and they were doing it out of obedience. And so in those particular cases, something like a prohibition like this all of a sudden makes more sense. It wasn't that they dedicated it. It was that God said these things are dedicated, and then there is no redemption for these things. God just wants them to be all done. here, as I'm reading this, it doesn't seem as clear, because especially earlier on, it seemed like people could devote things like I'm consecrating my house or something like that, or I'm consecrating this field. So I'm not sure it's the exact same concept, but Eric, as you had mentioned, we probably will see this. You didn't want to run ahead, so I ran us a little ahead, and again, I'll take the demerit for it. You exercised better self-control than I did, so well done. Anybody else have thoughts on any of these things? I mean, anything else from these last 3 chapters before we close the book on Leviticus? Doesn't look like it.
I'm
all right. Well, brothers, thank you for your insights as always. If you're still watching this, you've heard what we think. What do you think? We'd love to read your comments below in the comments section. Did we leave out something that you thought was interesting? Let us know. You disagree with us, agree with us? We'd love to know that as well. And Lord willing, we'll see you next time as we enter into the next book of Moses, the book of Numbers. But until we see you again, friends, get equipped, obey your king, and glorify your God.
A real what?